You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the DIGTECH Podcast, episode 64. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. On today's show, we explore the possibility of remote working in contract archaeology. Believe me, it's possible. So, dump the office and let's get to it. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. This is Archaeotech, the show where we test gear, review it, talk about new and innovative technology, and try to break in new tech so you don't have to. So, welcome to the show. Welcome, Paul. I kind of did a solo show last week, but you're back for this week.
Yeah, it's good to be back again.
Yeah, it's odd. I was on vacation on the same coast Paul lives on, and yet we're still so far away. And it was so hard from my side for planning and to do anything. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to talk about the Apple keynote real quick, do a short show, and then bust that thing out there and get it out. So that was nice and easy for me to do from the beach in the sketchy Wi-Fi I had.
Yeah, well, the last few weeks have been so crazy at work. There was really no good way to get together anyhow, even from my end.
I know. Sometimes I'm amazed that the Archaeology Podcast Network gets anything done because every single show has remote hosts. Like nobody's in the same place and everything happens. All these moving pieces come together and it's crazy.
Well, that's pretty fantastic. And that applies to today's topic.
Absolutely. So what we're going to talk about today, and I think I've probably mentioned this before because I'm such an advocate of it, but we're going to talk about remote working. I mean, a lot of people, I'm in a co-working space right now, and if you don't know what a co-working space is, they're kind of starting to pop up all over the place, especially here in the West Coast and these remote Silicon Valley outlets, which Reno's kind of weirdly becoming. Remote working is essentially, you're still working for somebody, but you're working somewhere else. That's really all that means. And basically, I feel like we've been doing this for a long time, and we'll get into that in a minute. We just don't realize it, but we'll get into that in a minute. But right now, I want to talk about how Paul and I both do some of our remote working kind of stuff, and how we've done it in the past. I'll start off because I know I've talked about a lot of this before, but I mean, I do a lot of stuff in the cloud. I'll just put that out there. And I always look for things that make my life, I guess, easier. Even if I'm not working with somebody else, I try to work with documents that are collaborative. There's Google Docs, even Microsoft documents if you're, like Word and Excel and stuff like that. If you're on the newest system, the Arc 365, that's a podcast. If you're on the Office 365 system, then your documents are also collaborative. I've worked with it a little bit. I don't think it works quite as well as Google's system, especially if you're doing live updates, like simultaneously working in a document. But it does work. And then there's Dropbox has their whole Dropbox paper thing. But we'll get into a lot of those other things. But most of my remote habits involve using Dropbox extensively. And I had to upgrade to Dropbox for business so I could share subfolders of shared folders. And that's a whole weird Dropbox thing. But you had to upgrade to be able to do that. And that's mostly what I use. And then obviously for computer itself, I always buy the best laptop that I can possibly afford at the time, because if I'm going to be out in the field or I'm going to be remote or something like that, I need as much power as I possibly can because I don't know what I'm going to have to do. So if it turns out I've got to create something or do something and I need the processing power to get that done, I don't want to have a substandard computer that's not going to be able to get that done. So if you know your use cases and your maximum output cases, then you buy the machine that's gonna hit that and probably exceed that just a little bit. And then if you buy a little bit more machine on top of that, then it'll be a little bit future proof, at least for a few years. So, and then of course, cell phone, data plans, hotspots, all kinds of stuff. I mean, anything I can do to stay connected and to do it efficiently while remote, and being real conscious about being remote, not just getting caught out somewhere and having to cobble together stuff, but being conscious of the fact that, well, I might want to do this, I might want to do this, and I might want to do this. So I'm going to have all these things to make that happen. And I always try to find the simplest way to do that. Sometimes it doesn't look that way because I'm in transition or trying to figure stuff out, but I do try to find the simplest way to do that. So, but I'm not going to get too much into it because we're going to go over a bunch of these things and we'll go over, how we use these different technologies as we go on. But Paul, what have been some of your more successful or even unsuccessful remote techniques and things you've used?
Yeah, so I don't have the opportunity to telecommute much because, the kind of work that I do, it's basically like being a plumber. You've got to be on site. I've got to be actually at school to help people fix things as they're broken. That said, though, we've set up over the years a lot of different kind of collaborative environments where we have to, where there's a class, for example, that's being offered between people at our school and students or teachers all around the world. And so you have to establish some sort of a communal space for them, a virtual classroom. We also have, the communication that goes behind class trips and such. And then because I do a lot of network admin, I have to frequently stay up late at night when something goes kablooey and remote in and do my work on our servers as if I were physically at the space, but when I'm actually sitting up in the living room. So, it's not exactly telecommuting, but it definitely applies to some of the techniques that we use probably apply to people who want to do something more along the line of telecommuting, or set up a presence in a physical space or with a group of people that they're collaborating with when they aren't physically there with those other people.
Right. And I think that's the first thing you have, the first question you have to ask yourself when you're thinking about telecommuting, or you're thinking about if you're an office manager, you're running the office or running the company, and you're thinking about setting this up for your employees is can you do it? And can everybody do it? Because one of the thing I think about is, what are the physical things I need to interact with at the office that would cause me to be at the office, right? So maybe that's I'm constantly using a large format printer or something like that, and I just don't have one of those at home. Or I'm constantly engaging with some piece of tech, or it's my job, like your job, Paul, to physically go in and fix things and do stuff you just simply can't do remotely. People need computers that need restarting, and they can't do that themselves. So you have to go in and do that themselves. So that's the first question you have to ask.
Unjam the printer,
that's right.
Fix the computer, restart
Absolutely.
this, chase down a wiring flaw,
That's
whatever.
right. You don't want anybody to go office space on the printer. So,
no.
so that's the first question you have to ask yourself. And let's look at a typical archaeology company. I think personally, aside from like lab work and people, that are physically handling artifacts and things like that, you don't really want to take that home. I mean, plenty of small companies do their lab work at home, but they've got a setup for that. So you don't. That's one job and one part of the process that probably just really needs to stay at work. And I would say for a lot of people, just because of finances, GIS is probably one that most people would probably do in the office, just because the GIS department typically has the best computers. They're accessing the servers, which you can't do remotely, but they have the computers running the computing power. Now, there are ways around that, of course. You can have all your processing done on another machine if you're working remotely, but that takes some setup.
We'll discuss a few of those.
Exactly. So, but the other big physical thing that we interact with from an archaeology standpoint at work is other people. And that's one of the most like confounding things I think that people look at. They say, I just can't do this remotely. I can't do it. Like, Paul and I are talking over Skype, but some people just can't handle that. They just can't handle that from a conceptual standpoint. They need to be able to physically sit in front of somebody, or sometimes there's a trust issue when you're like, are they working or are they not working? Are they just playing on Facebook? I guarantee you the people sitting in your office right now have checked Facebook 65 times in the last hour, unless you blocked it on your Wi-Fi. So, yeah. So, so that's happening anyway, and that comes into a different philosophy of work. But let's get into some of these other things, and we'll if we have time at the end, we'll kind of throw some different work philosophies at it at the end. So, let's talk about some of the things that you would do in an office normally, and then how you would do those remotely. So one of the things is meetings. People love having meetings. There's a lot of companies will have a Monday morning meeting just to figure out what we're doing for the week. Often they'll have a Friday meeting to figure out, okay, what did we do for the week? Where do we stand? And then, what do we got to do starting next week? Or something like that. And sometimes there's impromptu like project meetings and stuff like that where you have to get going. So what are some of the ways that we can get these meetings not only scheduled, but actually do them? Paul, you got some good ideas down here in the notes?
Yeah, well, I think that the distinction between a standing meeting or a regular scheduled meeting and that impromptu meeting is a big one, and that gets to the kind of work that you're doing and whether or not, how often you're going to be able to be away from the office if we're talking about an office environment. We have at work, we have a few meetings any given week, and we have occasional meetings we set up around a project, but a lot of the sit down and close a door and have a meetings that we have are in response to some sort of problem. It might be, again, because we're dealing with students, it might be a social problem revolving around technology, or it might be, some technical issue, but I have to sit down with the director of IT and say the net admin for a little while and figure out how we're going to solve a given problem. That's not something that's scheduled in advance. That's something that's planned for. That has to happen right now. So that kind of a situation is probably a lot harder to accommodate when people aren't physically in the same space. But for the other ones, and we do this not just through work, but for all sorts of different kinds of collaboration. So, for example, I've said before, I'm on the board of the local society, the local chapter of the American Archaeological Institute of America, the AIA. Mm-hmm. And so we have to schedule our meetings, our board meetings, and one of the tools that we use for that, and there are a bunch of different tools that do the similar sort of thing. We use Doodle. Mm-hmm. And we'll put that in the show notes later, where we have to pick some evening that we can get a quorum of board members in the same place to have our meeting. So we all go on there and we pick and indicate what days we can or cannot, what times we can or cannot meet. And at the end, somebody, the president of the board, will sit down and decide, okay, we have enough people on this given day, let's do it. So that's one tool. You use Calendly a lot. Mm-hmm. We schedule these podcast recording sessions through it. Another similar online tool. At school, a lot of the teachers use a product called You Can Book Me. So they'll upload their calendars because they have a fairly regular calendar. They meet Mondays at these times and these times, and they meet Tuesdays at these times and these times. But students need to make essentially office hour appointments with their teachers, and so they can then go to You Can Book Me, see the times that the teachers are around, and schedule an office hour visit. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of these tools that are available nowadays that answer similar sorts of problems in slightly different ways, that make the scheduling component of remote meetings much easier. I don't know if you have any other examples of them.
No, I mean, for scheduling, those are really it. Those are the big ones. Doodle is a really big one. I'd never heard of You Can Book Me, and then Calendly I had heard of before. Oh, there's also Acuity scheduling. I think it's called Acuity, which I'm a little sad that I didn't go with Acuity, because turns out Acuity is integrated with Squarespace, which is all my websites are on Squarespace. So I'm too embedded in Calendly to switch it over now, but I might do that in the future. But Calendly. I will just say one of the frustrating things for me about Calendly is I use multiple calendars for different things. I have lots of different calendars, and I have each Google email has its own calendar basically associated with it, and I have a few of those for different things that I do. But Calendly only lets you assign one calendar to it. So now I basically have my whole life on the APN calendar, because most of my scheduling happens through the APN. So if my wife and I are doing something, like we were on vacation last week and I didn't know what the Wi-Fi was going to be like. So since people can schedule 30 days out, I create an appointment that's basically called a schedule block, and I just put it in for all those days. But that has to be on the APN calendar, so nobody can schedule over it. And I have some recurring schedule blocks, like my Civil Air Patrol stuff that I do. I have that set as a recurring schedule block, and it's just a schedule block appointment over the top of the normal appointments that are there, so I can actually see what I'm doing, not just a schedule block. And because those are in other calendars, those different things. So I have to create the schedule block in the APN calendar, so it doesn't, it's kind of a mess, actually. But the way Calendly works is pretty great. I like it from a user standpoint. I've only once actually booked an appointment through somebody else's Calendly, and that process seemed okay. But yeah. So there's multiple ways you can schedule meetings and make that happen, and keep that rolling. So once you actually schedule your meeting, though, you have to figure out from a remote standpoint how you're going to actually talk to that person. And of course, one of the big ones is Skype. A lot of people are using Skype. There's Zoom. There's GoToMeeting. GoToMeeting's kind of expensive, but has a lot of nice functional tools in it. FaceTime if you're on Mac and all in the OS system. But I think the biggest deal here, like you mentioned, Paul, is these impromptu meetings. Scheduled meetings are okay. We can plan to be somewhere at a certain time. We're adults, right? But the impromptu meetings is really hard. And when I was working with Codify on app development, which we've talked about extensively on this podcast, Michael Ashley, who is the founder of Codify, is in Portland, Oregon. I mean, sorry, not Portland. That's where Chris Sims is, the other guy who's there now. Michael's in San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm here in Reno. So for us to be able to instantly communicate with each other, because there were some times of the day when we were both working on something where he needed an instant response from me and I needed an instant response from him. So we had, and I don't know who came up with this because I never heard it really before since we started doing it, but it's the idea of co-presence. So if you've got a bunch of people working remotely, you just agree, regardless of what time zone they're in, regardless of what they're doing, regardless of what's happening, you say, hey, on these days, from this time to this time, we're both going to be in front of our computer or accessible within 30-second notice. Like if I send you a message, I want a response, like you were sitting across from each other in the desk, right? That's co-presence. And you just decide, don't make it an 8-hour day. That's unrealistic. If people are telecommuting, they're going to want to kind of make their own schedule, and I think you should let people be flexible enough to do that. But have some co-present times set up throughout the day, so you can say, from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. or something like that, universal time. So no matter where we're at, time zones don't get screwed up. We are going to be in front of the computer, and at a moment's notice, we can talk. And then hopefully your impromptu meetings happen during those times. But if they don't, maybe you have semi-co-present times, and those are basically working hours. Like, you're not going to be out on a hike and out of cell service during that time. You'll be, within reasonable time period, able to get into a meeting really fast. And that's basically your working hours. So just some things to think about for remote workers.
Out on a hike, out of cell service, that probably applies to CRM archaeology quite a bit.
Yeah.
So how does this apply? How does this whole topic apply then for people who are actually out in the field needing to communicate with people back in the office?
Well, those are, I think that's obviously a big challenge, and we deal with that all the time here in Nevada, and that's, you can almost guarantee, like basically when you can't access somebody, because a lot of times we're not allowed to do overtime. So that by 3:30 p.m. or 4 p.m. or whatever the end time is, the crew will be back in the hotel. And I've said before, like to my crew chiefs and things like that, listen, don't immediately bail. Don't immediately shut everything off and go take a shower or do something. You've got a few things to do as a crew chief after the job. I want to be accessible to you for an hour after the fieldwork ends or something like that. So if you have to call me or I have to call you, I know that we can each get a hold of each other then. Because it's really hard working with remote field crews, because if you can't talk to them during the day, which is the professional courteous time to talk to somebody is during the work hours, you have to talk to them after work hours, but you don't really want to suck up all that time for them either. And they need to have a work-life balance where they are separating work. They don't want to be sitting down to a meal or having a drink or hanging out with friends at 8 p.m. and get a call from the boss. I mean, they just don't want that. So you have to have that separation. Now, of course, there's emergencies and there's scheduling things, and it's like, I have no choice but to call you right now. They have to understand that that's going to happen. But otherwise, you set up boundaries. And I think it's the same thing with office workers as well, is you just set up boundaries and you say, listen, I'm never going to call you. If I call you past this time, then it's a dire emergency and you better answer the phone. I'm not going to call you just to chat or ask how that report's coming. That's going to be during our semi-present or co-present working times that I'm going to talk to you about that, because that's work time. So, but that's one of the hardest things to do when people start talking about remote working, is separating home from work. And even, me, I'm at this co-working space. I don't need to be here. I could do everything I'm doing right now from home, but I just don't want to be at home. I'm trying to separate that mentally. The being at home means I'm not working. It never really works out that way. I'm always doing something, but being at home.
No, it doesn't work for anybody.
I know, right? Yeah. But I try to separate that, because while it doesn't work really when I'm at home, it really works when I'm at work. When I'm at my office. When I'm at my office, there's no home-like distractions. Like, I'm here and I'm working and I'm focused. When I'm home, I might be doing a little work or I might be doing a little home stuff, which was the problem before I started coming here, is I was constantly getting distracted at home because I had that mix of things there. So if you're going to do if you're going to support remote working, you might want to consider paying for people to work in co-working spaces. And this is also, you don't have to pay for an office yourself. Like if you're paying $6,000 a month or whatever for office space, a big office space, and you can drop that cost down to a couple $1,000s a month just paying for, internet and things like that for your employees so they can high speed stuff. That's the whole reason we're really talking about this, getting rid of that whole space, the space you don't need, and then working at home. But that's pretty much the end of our first segment, which went really fast. And we have a lot more we want to cover. So let's take a break, and we will come back and try to get through some of this stuff. And we'll be back in just a second.
This network is supported by our listeners. You can become a supporting member by going to arcpodnet.com/members and signing up. As a supporting member, you have access to high-quality downloads of each show and a discount at our future online store, and access to show hosts on a members-only Slack team. For professional members, we'll have training shows and other special content offered throughout the year. Once again, go to arcpodnet.com/members to support the network and get some great extras and swag in the process. That's arcpodnet.com/members.
All right, we're back, and we are talking about remote working and how you can possibly do that as an archaeologist. We've already talked about meetings and covering those and making sure you're co-present and you have established times that you're going to be working, that you're going to be 30-second accessible versus 5-minute accessible versus not accessible at all. So you can separate that work-life balance. But while you are maybe co-present and working on stuff, collaborative documents are kind of all the rage these days. And I've been in documents, especially on Google Docs is the best one I've found for it. I've been in Google Docs where there's 3 or 4 of us in there, and we're putting together a proposal, and all of us are working on different sections, and we're also in voice contact because we've got a Skype chat or a Google Hangout or something running, and then we're talking about this document, and it's really cool to see something coming together, and you can see the person's name on the screen next to their cursor, and everybody's typing, and everything's coming up differently. That's actually really neat to see and to watch it happen.
We use it a lot. Our teachers actually use it for planning quite frequently, even when they're physically in the same spot, the same classroom, having an after-school meeting, deciding some bit of curriculum, and 4 of them will all be typing into the same document, and it shows up different colors as it's coming through. But it's an incredibly useful tool, and collaboration is really the killer app with Google Docs. You can use anything you want to write an essay, for example. But if you want to collaborate on that essay with somebody else, you need one of these cloud-based services. And Google Docs is really the 800-pound gorilla right now.
It really is, and I love the way. There's some formatting things I don't like about Google Docs, like some things with their with Sheets. They're basically a spreadsheet program, and then I use Slides occasionally for their basically their PowerPoint kind of thing, their presentation stuff. And then of course Google Docs, which is just their word processing document. And there are some formatting things I don't like. Like, I don't think I'd ever use a Google Doc as a final document. I always bring that over to Pages for polishing or something like that. But as far as creating it goes, if it's got to be collaborative, or I want it to be available everywhere on any device for anyone that I can share with easily, I'll probably start it in a Google Doc. I mean, I'm watching Paul do stuff in the Google Doc we have for the show notes right now, and we use it extensively on the APN. So, because it's easy. I don't care about the formatting here. Like, this is not a final product. It's just our show notes. So it's perfectly easy to have this on. And Paul's on a computer more than likely, and I'm sitting here on my iPad with Google Docs up, split screen with Skype, so we can have our chat in the background as well. So very collaborative. And that's the thing, right now, Paul and I are both recording this podcast separately on either end. I'm recording both sides on my end. He's recording his side on his end. We've got a Google Doc running in split screen on an iPad with Skype on the other side so we can chat. I mean, this is collaborative networking right here, and we're putting together something unique using this collaborative methodology.
Yeah, we're really dogfooding it right now.
Yeah. So for people in the Mac ecosystem, which is really not that many archaeology companies, most of them have Windows systems, but for people in the Mac ecosystem, for a few generations now, the Mac I guess word processing documents like Pages and Numbers and Keynote are collaborative now. Now, I've done collaborative documents in Pages, and I've actually done collaborative slide presentation where we're putting together a slide deck for a pitch, basically. And we were both working on different sections of it, and that was pretty cool to watch come together as well. But unlike Google Docs, where you can actually watch somebody type in real time, it seemed like Pages had more of a lag to it when we were creating a document in Pages. We were doing it when it first came out just to try it, and it didn't seem as fluid. Like somebody make a change, and then I go to doing something, and then all of a sudden the paragraph I'm working in has been deleted, or it's been wiped out or moved or changed to somewhere, and then it gets confused, and the changes weren't happening as much in real time as I wanted them to. I'm not sure what the reason for the lag is. I don't think it was our sides. I think it was just Apple built that in or didn't take it out or for some reason didn't think about it. And it's just not as responsive as Google Docs is. But it is collaborative nonetheless. Maybe not instantaneously collaborative if you want to work in it together, but it's collaborative if you're both working on something and you say, hey, go check this out. I added some stuff to the document, then do this. What I absolutely hate, I don't know how many times I've been working in a CRM firm, and you're working on a site record or worse yet, a draft report, and somebody sends off the draft report to somebody else, and then you just end up with this string of initials at the end of the file name because every time they make a change, they feel like they have to change the file name for version control. But most programs already have version control in them. Like it's already in there. You can already go back and see other versions, or hey, turn on track changes or something like that. And then you can see where the last changes were, but don't change the file name. You end up with 700 different versions of the same document. Paul, you sound like you know exactly.
Oh yeah, I know exactly. Actually, I'm working on a on a side project right now, editing a volume that should be coming out sometime next year, the year after, and we're using track changes and such. We're using this entirely offline, not collaborative documents, but through a whole naming convention for the files, invariably they come back named wrong, so I have to rename them back into the convention.
Right.
Make sure track changes is turned on them. These are Word documents that are going back and forth. But if I could move every one of the collaborators in this volume onto Google Docs instead, I'd be so much happier because, again, the version control is right there. And in an office environment, that's huge. I mean, to be able to look at something and somebody has taken a spreadsheet and accidentally screwed it up. They pasted something into the wrong cell. I can just quick look at the history and tick back through it and find when it happened and what is actually supposed to be in that cell and revert that. And that's so much easier than it ever was when we were emailing documents back and forth. And hey, is the Excel file that we've got our inventory on, is this the latest version or is this one from last year? Yeah.
Oh my God.
Awful. Inventory, actually, that for something with like numbers or the Google Sheets, MS Office 365 with Excel. A lot of jobs, not just what we do, but certainly I'm sure a lot of anybody that's doing field work that has equipment to manage and whatnot has inventories, and those kinds of documents are perfect. Even though you don't need the back and forth instant update, but an inventory list that is shareable to everybody in the group. That is always up to date is fantastic, and you don't have to build a whole interface around it in order to get people access to the database that's managing these things. You don't necessarily have to have an equipment manager that's keeping track of it, though that might help. But these tools for just managing the day-to-day ins and outs of the offices are really handy. Yeah,
absolutely. You've got source control down here too. What do you mean by that?
Okay, source control. I didn't even know where to put this, but under this heading of collaborative documents, I thought made as good a sense as any. And especially since we mentioned version histories of our documents, source control allows programmers to keep track of changes in the programs that they're writing. And for at least 10 years, maybe more now, there's been a trend towards these distributed version control systems. The leader of them all is one called Git, and that was developed by the Linux Foundation for changes to the Linux kernel. And that's a huge project with probably thousands of programmers spread around the world, all contributing their own little bits. but it allows them to make changes and contribute those changes back into each other's, into the project as a whole, but there isn't necessarily a master copy of anything. So we use Git, and we use not GitHub, which is one of the two websites for hosting Git that's very popular. We use one called Bitbucket, and the programmer, the web dev at our office, and I use it constantly, absolutely all the time, in order to keep track of the programs that we're writing. So he'll make some changes and contribute them upstream, and I can then, from my machine, check them out and verify them. If I like them, I merge them into what I'm working on. We have adjoining offices, so we could discuss things by just getting up and walking next door. But but it would work equally well if we were, and we've done it like this, if there's a problem that we have to fix over a weekend. He's in the city, I'm upstate. We can both be doing our programming independently. We chat or text or email with each other a little bit, phone call, and make everything work. And a big part of that is having a system that we didn't develop that allows us to manage our code and our changes independently. So, it brings in some of the ideas of the collaborative documents like in Google Docs, and definitely brings in a lot of the version control that we see in Google Docs, Office 365, track changes, Dropbox will also do that. I think that version control is probably a whole, source control is probably a whole another topic that I could talk about for quite length, explaining exactly how we use it. But if you're doing anything that's strictly text, I think that's something that one ought to look at, especially if you're doing any kind of programming.
Yeah, if you in the last few weeks, hell, in the last 5 years, added your initials to the end of a file, you're doing it wrong. So give us a call, contact us, and we'll help you through it. So anyway, the biggest reason I say that too is it's still not foolproof. Like, you still don't know if that's the most recent version or whatever, unless you know how to look at the file and see when the last change was made. So, but again, that is getting, like you said, off topic a little bit. But one of the things you mentioned in there a couple times was basically related to cloud computing. So one of the essential things you're going to need if you're going to dump the office entirely, or even if you're just trying to remotely deal with your field crews better, is some sort of cloud computing. Now, you can create your own cloud computing networks, which means you still have to have a place that you store your servers and all your information is actually stored. But for most people, the easiest way to do it is going to be to get something like Dropbox for Business or something like that, and those are pretty secure. I mean, they have their issues occasionally. For the most part, for most, I guess, usual circumstances where you're basically just using this to store and retrieve files, then there's not going to be that much of an issue. Again, I use Dropbox for Business. It's $75 a month for their minimum plan, and that's 5 user licenses. So if you've got a bigger office and you need more people, then you're going to end up paying more money. And I don't know what it goes up to from there. You'll have to look it up. But when you're looking at that versus, say, the server space that you would have in your office that you no longer own, then it's actually not that much money when you really look at it. It's just one more thing you're paying for, but it's not paying rent, and you're not paying these exorbitant costs for all that other stuff. And you have the peace of mind that your data is actually multiple times backed up on Dropbox servers. So if they have something go down or if they have a problem, it's really hard for them actually to lose data. It's really hard. It's more likely you screwed up and lost the data rather than them losing the data. So if you learn how to use it and you understand what's going on, then it's actually really easy to use. So, I'm actually recording this podcast right now into Adobe Audition in a folder on a file that's actually on Dropbox, and Dropbox is continuously syncing while this is happening. Now, if I had an internet issue or slow computing, I'd probably pause Dropbox while I was doing this, and then when I was done, upload it all en masse. But it's actually happening in real time. This is saving off-site where I'm at right now. So anyway, there's lots of different cloud computing things. Just know that it's a piece to your puzzle that you're going to have to get, something that you're going to have to do.
One big piece of the puzzle, if you're somebody that has an office, you're running a CRM firm, and you're used to having your own servers on site, is that you can now host a lot of your servers in the cloud. We don't actually do that at school. What we have is virtualized servers, so it's kind of similar. So whereas when, 15 years ago, we used to have a room full of different servers, each one tasked to a certain application or doing a certain task for us, we combined all those as virtual servers. And so we now have our main systems are running on 3 hyperconverged systems. So they're a modular 2-unit, 3-unit box that has 3 servers built into it. And then virtual servers, we've got about 20 of them running on that. The next step beyond that is to move some of those virtual servers away from being physically hosted in our location to hosting them up in the cloud, like on Amazon servers. And so that, if you're somebody looking at simplifying your what you're doing with your office, trying to not have to pay for a server room, that's an especially attractive option.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're using it even if you're not doing virtualized servers up in the cloud, if you're using something like Dropbox instead of, hosting a file share on your own, the chances that they're doing it right are much better than the chances of you doing it right. I mean, in terms of security, in terms of backup and redundancy, in terms of a single point of failure, if you're doing backups, but your building burns down and you've been storing your backups in the same building as your server, you've lost everything. That's not going to happen if you're saving those files up in a service like Dropbox. So, there are some distinct advantages to looking at cloud computing in its various forms, for an office environment.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So one of the other ways that you need to be able to communicate with each other, whether it's if you don't want to have it to be face to face, I guess, is email, of course, but email is the devil, and email is the devil in the same way that adding your initials to the end of a file is the devil. I feel like it's the same thing, especially when you've got an in-depth conversation going over email. Email is great. If I need a single piece of information from somebody, I'm going to send it to them and say, hey, do you have this? Or here's a document for you to look at, or something like that, if it's something I need to send to them that way, if they're not connected to me in any other way. But I've had so many conversations over email, and it just gets so frustrating, especially when it's more than 2 people involved. Somebody doesn't hit reply all, and then they're out of the loop. Now you've created, it's like divergent evolution. It's like now a branch has been made in this email chain, and they're off in their own land, and they're not even there, and they're constantly coming back. I just had this with an agency archaeologist. I have a prime contractor, and the 3 of us were trying to collaborate and talk about this project. And the agency archaeologist just kept hitting reply to me and not replying all to my guys. So I was adding him when I would reply back to her, and then he'd have to look through and see what she said, and it was just like a nightmare. But one of the things I've been using for over a year now that I've talked about on this before, I probably had it as an app of the day, is Slack. And Slack is great for team communication. It integrates with any device, any system. It's basically just organized communication. And the thing I like about it is, for let's say the APN Slack team, we have probably 20 plus channels on the APN Slack team. But most of the hosts, like yourself, Paul, you can probably only see a handful of those because that's all you need to see. Now, none of them are private, so you could actually see some of the others if you wanted to. Actually, I think some of them are private on the APN one, just because I wanted the hosts to have their own privacy. But on the ones that aren't private, you can join them if you want, or you can leave them if you want. But on the ones that are private, those conversations can stay between the people who are invited to that channel, and then that's it. Like I think that we used to have like a business channel and some other stuff on there that the co-founder Tristan and I were in that nobody else was in because this was APM business. We had so much stuff that we've since split that off into its own APN team, like APN management team channel, not channel, but team. And then we have probably 30 channels on there now for all the different things we want to talk about. And all a channel is a room, basically. So, and then anybody who's a premium subscriber to the APN at any of the 3 levels, one of the first things you get is access to our members only Slack team. And in there, it's a bunch of unlocked channels. None of them are private, and you get to see, well, some of them are private depending on your level. Like we got some professional ones that are private for the pro level people. But that's so you can go into a channel for the show and then talk to the show host about that show, and you can keep all your conversations organized by topic. And that's how I love Slack for that. And we got to kind of slam through this a little bit because we're running up on time. But Trello is another one that we use pretty extensively at the APN, and I've used with other organizations. It's basically a way to organize your workflow, if you want to look at it that way. Project management, it's really good for project management. You create basically these lists, which are the top-down vertical lists, and those go horizontal. So you've got lists going from left to right, and then under each one of these major topic headings, you've got cards. Think of them like Post-it notes. On those cards, though, the cards are really powerful. You can have integrations to those from like Google. You can attach docs to it. You can drop files onto it. I haven't seen a file size limit. I know there is one, but I haven't experienced it yet. You can create checklists, all these things, and then as these cards get finished or go to different stages, you just drag them over to the next stage of the project. And from a project management workflow, that's how we do our APN stuff. It's pretty simple for the APN. We usually just have ideas in development and publish. We don't really need any more steps than that. But that's how we do that. Paul, are there anything else under like communication and things like that you wanted to mention, or maybe your impressions of Slack and Trello?
Well, I've been very much aware of Slack for quite a while. It's very popular amongst a lot of the ed tech people. We never really picked it up in our office. One of my coworkers uses it for keeping track of things. When he's got questions, technical questions, there's a Mac admins group, but those aren't people that he knows personally. Those are people out there in the wilds of the internet, a couple of whom he trusts because they tend to have good answers. It didn't ever meet our needs. We all are working out of the same office for the most part. Trello definitely could be useful for us. We haven't explored it, but it's been working great. I'm quite enjoying it using for the Archaeotech podcast. It's working really well for jotting down ideas and then fleshing them out and then turning them into actual podcast episodes. Email, like you said, it's a devil. And then the lowest common denominator of any kind of team communication, and we use this constantly at work, is text. We're constantly texting each other. Hey, I need help with this. Hey, could you check on that while you're over there? Does anybody know the password for whatever service? Right. So we have a bunch of different group texts, and that's totally ad hoc. But that's good. I think having that ad hoc, not quite as structured as some of the other ones, is useful in its own context. We could certainly do that same stuff with a Slack channel, but we haven't. Yeah. We've just fallen into being used to texting each other.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was real surprised when I introduced Slack to my Civil Air Patrol squadron. I've got admittedly, I have a lot of older people that are there that are sometimes adverse to newer technologies, but the older people that I have there are almost all former pilots or current pilots. So they're a different sort of older person. They have smartphones, they understand technology, they're not as adverse to doing these things. So it took a couple months for me to get them used to it, but once we did, because we had the same thing, we were texting back and forth. Some people wouldn't, include everybody on the text, and we had all these group texts. And then, on iOS, you can't name the conversation. Well, you can name the conversation, but it was too cumbersome to go do that. So once I got everybody moved to Slack, though, now I have people actually using that as text. I get very few texts anymore. Sometimes people don't realize they can use Slack in certain circumstances, so they'll still send me a text. And then I'm like, hey, you could have sent this, can you reply to this in Slack in this channel so we can keep a record of this conversation? And then in Slack, you can, just like you can do a group text, you can make ad hoc without creating a whole new channel. You can create an ad hoc direct message chain between several people, and as many as you want, the whole entire Slack team if you want. For some reason, you can just say, hey, we're going to have this conversation going right now. I have a few of those conversations on my Civil Air Patrol one and on the APN one where there's 2 or 3 of us in this direct message chat, which basically is just our own private channel that nobody can see. It's not archivable. It's not anything, which I guess is maybe why people use it, but probably just laziness too. But anyway, yeah, if you're currently in chat hell, text message hell, and you're also dealing with putting people on a group text where some of them are Android and some of them are iOS, and some messages are getting missed and dropped and put different places, and the emojis aren't working out and all that stuff, then you're a prime candidate for Slack. And Slack is free, by the way. I forgot to mention that. There's some cool customizations you can do to Slack and some other stuff that make it cost more money. Slack goes from free to ridiculously expensive. There's no in between. But the free version, I'm on 13 free Slack teams right now, and I just joined another one today. And they're all free. and I don't know how Slack makes any money, quite frankly, but I think it's those big enterprise businesses, because when you do start paying for it, you're paying a lot for it, but you're getting a lot more at the same time. So anyway, let's take another break, and we're going to come back to this for segment 3, and I've got an idea for possibly some bonus content. So let's take a break now so we can wrap this up here in a second. Hey, podcast fans, check out the ARC365 podcast at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365. That's ARCH365 for your daily dose of archaeology. Each episode is less than 15 minutes long, and we have some great guests recording about awesome archaeology. We also try to throw in some definitions and basic archaeological information. So, check out the 365 Days of Archaeology podcast only in 2017 at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365 today. Find us also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Music by typing ARC365 into the search. Now back to the show. Okay, we are back talking about remote working in archaeology. How can you do it? Should you do it? All those things. So we're going to kind of skip around just a little bit here, but one of the things I wanted to mention briefly, only because it's fun, albeit creepy, if you still have an office, like you're not going full remote on this thing, but if you still have an office, but you're going to send some of your employees out to be remote, and they're out all the time, but then you still want to kind of interact with them in meetings and things like that. I still think this is kind of a weird thing, but telepresence robots, they came online right about the time the iPad did. As soon as we had a really solid device that could be, Wi-Fi and touchscreen and really solid quality, these robots appeared. And there'll be a link in the show notes to a Wirecutter article. And they went through some extensive testing, and their pick ended up being the Suitable Technologies Beam Enhanced Robot. And basically all these things is a solid base that can move 360 degrees, forward, back, whatever, can rotate. They're usually on some sort of tall arm, and then the iPad's at the top. So theoretically, whoever's remoting into this thing, you see their face on the iPad at your face level, and they can usually raise and lower. On the better ones, they can come down to a sitting height, raise up to a standing height. They could walk down a hallway with you because they've got full control over the robot from their side. They see forward, backward, speed controls, left, right, stuff like that. When the robot starts to die, its battery, it will automatically go to its charging station, or you can just turn it off and it will just go to its charging station. It knows the layout. It knows where to go to get back to the charging station. So I imagine a future where we've got a conference table and there's just like 12 of these robots with iPad faces on them all around it, like nobody's there. I don't know what usefulness that is.
We actually had experience with that 10 or more years ago with an early iteration of one of these. There was a student who was sick and was going to be in the hospital for a few weeks. And so kind of, I guess, as a test case, this company that was developing them arranged to have a robot in his classrooms.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it could raise its hand if it wanted to ask questions. It didn't work particularly well, and so the plan was dropped. But that was a long time ago, and that was before bandwidth was quite as good as it is now. It was before Wi-Fi was as good as it is now, and video streaming wasn't nearly as common as it is now. All those things, I think, have caught up with where the company wanted to be, and I don't remember the name of the company. Otherwise, I'd put it in the show notes, or maybe not, because I think I just slagged on them a little bit.
Nice.
But
yeah, I mean, it always reminds me of those. I think there was. There's always a movie somewhere where, God, I've seen it a few times where, somebody's up there and teaching a college class, and there's a tape recorder sitting at one of the students' desks. Then in the next shot, there's 10 tape recorders. Then in the next shot, it's all tape recorders or video cameras, depending on what year you're watching the movie. And then at one point, I think it was Real Genius or something like that, where even the instructor, like, it was all tape recorders in the students, and then the instructor had a video playing. They weren't even there. Like, nobody was there. And it was just, that was perfect. So I don't know what kind of usefulness these things have, but they are kind of fun, and they're an interesting deal. All right, so let's see. Let's go to, well, you've got, Paul, this is more your expertise here. So telecommuting into an office computer. So there still is an office, but you're working remotely, maybe temporarily or permanently, who knows? But you need to access information stored at the office. How do you go about doing that? What are some of the ways you can do that?
Right. I'll try to keep this brief, but basically there are a number of different different programs that one can use to get back to a specific computer in the office. So remote desktop apps on the Mac, it's baked into it with Back to My Mac. Microsoft has built on top of terminal services. They've got RDP, and then you can get third-party services like Log Me In, which will allow you to log into your machine from a web browser somewhere. And basically, what they do is from off-site, from remote computer, you can log in as if you're looking directly at your own machine and interacting with whatever files your computer has access to, its hard drive, the network, and so on. It's like sitting in front of the computer, but you're not in front of that computer, you're in front of a different computer. I just wanted to bring that up because, I could certainly envision when somebody's out in the field, especially if they've traveled somewhere and they've unfortunately forgotten something important that they need back at home, at the home office on their machine. So long as that thing is powered up, they can still remote into it. Now, in order to do so effectively, safely maybe, another component of this might be having a VPN, a virtual private network. So most operating systems now have a number of different VPN protocols baked into their network stack, and any decent firewall will have at least one kind of VPN option to it. So what that can do is allow you as the remote worker to act as if you're on the network of your office place, and then you can have access to whatever network resources, databases, file servers, and so on, as if you're physically in your office space, but you're not. And so we use those combined. We use VPNs to access our office network, and then we use RDP to access our Windows servers. Works very well for us. And so most of the kind of, late night call, something's broken, I have to fix something, work that I do, I'll end up, I'll open up a VPN session and remote into whichever server's misbehaving and kick it around a bit until I can get it working right. So that's just a useful tool set that if you're still, partially in an office and partially outside, one can look at.
And if you need to unplug and plug in your machine again at the remote site, you can just log into your telepresence robot with hands, now with arms, and go over there and just do all the work you need to do. Wasn't there a Bruce Willis movie about that not too long ago? Where he was like, they were like all in these, what was that called? They were all in like these bodies, basically. Like you see these perfect looking humans walking around and you realize that they're just being controlled by people at home that never leave the house. Anyway, so yeah, that's the ultimate, that's where our reality is headed. I'm pretty sure of it. But, all right, so let's talk quickly about some of the advantages and disadvantages of doing all this. I think we've kind of alluded to it by talking about the different technologies, but from an overall standpoint, I think personally some of the big advantages are people can spend more time with family, creating their own schedules, basically. If they need to, if it works out for them, or they have young children and they really can't go to work until like 9-10 o'clock in the morning because they've got to get them off to school and stuff like that, but then they're willing to work late at night once the kids go to bed, and that's okay for your schedule. Like if all they're doing is report writing and they're not interacting with clients, maybe that's okay, and they can create that schedule however they feel. Some people, like, between like my wife and I, she works great at night. Like when she's after work and she's working on something, she can work 10, 11, 12 o'clock and she just go into the night. I'm totally wiped out by like 10 o'clock. Like I can't do anything. If I got to edit a podcast, it's just not going to happen, or it'll be a really bad job. But if I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, I am the most productive for those first few hours that early in the morning, no matter how much sleep I had the night before. I don't know what it is with me. I'm just like, right when I wake up, bam, I can do anything. But a few hours before going to sleep, I'm completely useless. And everybody has their own patterns for that. So, and I think you open yourself up to a bigger working pool too. Like if you say, hey, we need people for this office to do these things, but you're limiting yourself, especially in a field like archaeology, where there's very few people in your local area that are actually qualified to do what you need them to do. You close yourself off to a massive pool of workers if you say you need to be at this office at this date and this time. If you can set up a remote working situation with a bunch of people, then you open yourself up to the entire world versus just, small square area. So, Paul, what do you think are some advantages to this?
Well, obviously, you alluded to this then too. The collaboration across distance, time zones. I think that's actually the killer app for telecommuting of any kind. Is that you can work with people. If you've set up your infrastructure for it properly, you can work with people all around the world in a productive manner. It depends entirely on what kind of work's being done. Again, it's not something that I can do because I have to physically be in a location to work with physical objects. But if one can work with data, if one can work with producing output reports, for example, then, geez, I don't see why one wouldn't want to.
Yeah, totally. So some of the disadvantages are lack of face-to-face interaction. That was actually really talked about by, God, was it GE or something like that? There was a thing back in like the 60s or earlier than that. They set up this campus where, God, who was that? Maybe it was IBM. I don't know if they're that forward-thinking. Anyway, there was it was some computing. I read it in that book, The Innovators by Walter Isaacson. It was a really good book, but anyway, they set up this whole campus that was intentionally set up to keep offices from similar departments like separate from each other. So they'd have to walk down these halls, and these chance encounters with people completely outside of your field would happen, and people would get to talking, and then amazing collaborations would take place because of these chance encounters. Like, a person from this department who would never speak to the person from this department are actually having a conversation. They're like, hey, we can actually help each other and create something amazing. Now, less likely that's going to happen in archaeology because we have pretty specific tasks that we need to do: get the report done, get it out the door, and get moving. But I think those chance encounters and those interactions are actually important, which is why I'm an advocate for if a company was going to be a remote company, but most of the people were actually local, like they lived in the same place, then if you don't have any offices at all, maybe schedule some conference room time somewhere. There's conference rooms you can rent all over town, in any town. Yeah,
they're big here in New York.
Yeah, exactly. And just have a meeting like once a week or something like that and say, hey, every week, or have a lunch meeting, better yet, something a little more social, but say just so you can have some face time. Everybody can keep together, and, once a week they're going to be there. So, your coworker Joe isn't actually telecommuting in from Italy and he's just totally checked out, something like that. But, then you can have that face-to-face interaction. And then I guess the other thing, like you have down here, Paul, is losing boundaries. That work-life balance. You really have to. Right. You really have to watch that. So.
Yeah. So the lack of face-to-face interaction for me is really a matter of camaraderie and teamwork, a sense of working with a group of people on a specific project. And I feel like that can get lost when you don't see people face-to-face. I know that my best friends are people that I worked with in the field, and years ago, and we're still buddies, and people that I've, would have a lot in common with, that would like otherwise, but have never worked on a particular project with. I'll feel like a stranger to them. As soon as we start working face to face on something, then it all clicks. So if you're worried about about teamwork and about a sense of cohesiveness within the group of your office, then that's a significant disadvantage for somebody like me. Losing boundaries, again, depends on the work, but we all are feeling that pressure of getting the texts and the emails well after work hours, and then feeling that we have to respond to it.
Yeah.
This is a long weekend. We're recording on Columbus Day, and I've deliberately not looked at my work email. Well, no, that's not true. I looked at my work email, but I haven't responded to my work email all weekend, and just because I don't want to lose that boundary.
Yeah, I hear you. And it's that's probably one of the biggest things is the work-life balance and losing those boundaries. So again, goes back to co-presence and having those times that you set aside, even if you're remote, having those times and keeping those times sacred and saying, listen, from this time to this time is going to be work time where I'm going to be accessible, and have that time frame on it. Say I'm going to be accessible within 30 seconds or 60 seconds, which isn't unrealistic when you think about an office. If I can just yell to the next desk over or walk down to your office, you're literally accessible in 30 seconds to me, unless you're on the phone or something. So you should be accessible that way during that tight co-presence time. And then the semi-co-presence time, is maybe a few minutes. Like that's the rest of the workday. Like within 5 minutes, I can get back to you with an answer, or 10 minutes or something like that. And then if that's not working out, somebody needs to be on top of monitoring that situation and making sure that that's happening. And then I guess the biggest thing here is really adjusting from a manager standpoint, your idea of what work means. It's not about the hours. It's really not. And if a lot of these people are on salary, you're already acknowledging the fact that it's about the output. So as long as people are getting their work done and that work is good quality and the work is on time and there's no issues with that, try not to concern yourself with how they're getting that work done. It really doesn't matter. That's all you have to look at. It's the output. Who cares how it got done? Who cares when it got done? It got done at the time you said it was going to get done, and it's a high quality. That's the only two metrics you really should measure that by. If somebody's consistently late or consistently has problems, well, then you need to talk about it. And if the problem is because they can't focus at home, well, then there you go. But probably that's not the problem. It's more likely other stuff. So, all right. I think that's it. You got any final thoughts to add to this, Paul?
No, just to say that the losing boundaries one is it's kind of cuts both ways. You mentioned that the telepresence allows one to work in whatever manner is best suited for them based on their schedule, their when they like to work, what time of the day, and so on. But at the same time, the same tools can be used to totally erode those boundaries and to eliminate the autonomy that you'd get from that. Yeah,
totally. So, all right. We've gone a little long on this, and we've kind of ran right over our App of the Day segment. So we're going to throw that into bonus content, which we haven't really done. I know, which we haven't really done enough of on this show. And I need to really start baking in some more bonus content, because as long as, just keep in mind for membership, for premium subscribers, or for people that don't want to be premium subscribers, which statistically is probably 99% of our listeners, we're never going to shortchange a show and make you pay for the real good stuff. We're going to give you an amazing show and pack it with information, and then we're just going to provide a little extra to those who want to subscribe and help support the APN and help keep the lights on over here. So if you're interested in APN membership, go to arcpodnet.com/members. You can see the membership plans there. For the top two plans, our standard and professional membership, you'll see bonus content. So anybody who has that, go check the bonus content page and you'll see our App of the Day segment, which will include right there. And for the App of the Day segment, well, I'm not going to tell you. Go over to the bonus content. Check it out. So, all right. Well, thanks, Paul, and
thanks, Chris.
Thanks everybody else. Yep, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.